Good morning. My name is Amy Norcross, and I'm a teacher candidate for TESOL, Teachers of English to Students of Other Languages. I'm enrolled at MSU this semester in English 695, Principles of Second Language Acquisition. I have been tasked with coming up with a model or analogy for what learning a second language is like. For my analogy, I have chosen learning a second language is like baking a cake. And if it's Thanksgiving weekend at my house, then that's going to be one of my absolute favorite desserts, a pumpkin cheesecake. Second language acquisition depends on a variety of factors, including age, motivation, and learning style, to name a few, just as a good cheesecake is also dependent on the age or experience and motivation of the chef. Second language acquisition goes through predictable types, levels, or learning stages. Students will move through particular stages of production from one or two word utterances to short phrases and sentences to engaging in actual conversations. Most students with the same L1 will make similar common mistakes, such as overgeneralizations, substitutions, and production patterns. Young chefs are more comfortable following a simpler recipe, such as those you would find in a cake-making package or box, whereas more experienced chefs enjoy the challenge of following a recipe from scratch. The crust is like the foundation of second language acquisition. The graham cracker could represent the knowledge in the native language and how it applies to the second language. It also includes both positive and negative transfer of the L1 to the L2. The cinnamon is the motivation, the emotion, the positive classroom atmosphere that has to be established in order for learning to be conducive. The sugar is that extra little spice of relationship building teachers do with the student and their families. Depending on the age of the learner will determine the approach and learning style somewhat. Older learners will focus more on grammar and vocabulary due to the higher level of cognition they possess, whereas younger learners are more likely to respond to immersion and modeling. Young learners are also more likely to have a native-like pronunciation or less of an accent than older learners. Older learners might respond more to a behaviorist approach since they are able to maintain attention to practicing and recognizing rules. Younger learners might respond better to a more interactive approach, such as innatism and/or constructivism. All learners, regardless of age, would benefit from an individualized approach that was centered on their particular learning style, just as a chef will customize a recipe to fit their particular tastes. Research shows that the best language learner outcomes use a combination of both explicit and implicit instruction, regardless of the age or language level of the learner. Following the recipe is like explicit teaching. Those strategies used to overtly focus the student's attention on explanations, rules, steps to follow, direct corrections, conventions, and so forth to help them become more proficient in the new language through a conscious application of declarative knowledge. The recipe contains a specific list of ingredients and amounts of ingredients. The ingredients represent some of the individual parts of language acquisition, like grammar, vocabulary, and forms. The chef modifying the recipe would be an example of implicit instruction, those actions that teachers take to encourage students to learn by doing without overt instruction. The filling is an example of both explicit and implicit instruction. Continuing the instruction in the rules, following directions and corrections would be an example of that explicit teaching. Constantly monitoring students to see if they need more practice, providing extra activities for practice, is more an example of implicit teaching, as students will learn to create their own meaning from the conversation. The cream cheese, the largest of the ingredients, is the heart of explicit instruction. These are your daily activities and practice. This is the biggest ingredient and therefore the biggest area that is covered daily in practice. The butter could represent the vocabulary. It's the glue that holds everything together. The eggs represent grammar. Grammar rules are easy to break and are quite fragile until they've really been internalized or mixed into the filling of the cake. And the heavy cream could represent the forms. These are the patterns and templates that students follow to produce grammatically correct sentences. And then, as always, in a filling, we need a little extra something. We like to throw in vanilla extract. This could represent optional ingredients or a way to customize your learning plan to fit your individual student. The pumpkin, which is another large portion of the pumpkin cheesecake, is the flavor of fun that teachers create in producing relevant and engaging activities for their student. The chef can add more or less of an ingredient to customize the recipe, like providing students lots of opportunities to practice in real-world scenarios. Also, the chef demonstrates how to perform a particular stage of the recipe by modeling the steps of that particular process. Good chefs create camaraderie and teamwork in the kitchen, the same way the teacher must foster a positive learning environment in the classroom. I always try to be positive when I speak with my students about areas of improvement, and I always try to start with a specific compliment or praise about what the student has already done well before I offer constructive criticism about what still needs work. Students need to feel confident and comfortable enough to take risks and make mistakes in the classroom. They also need quiet time to process and think. I use a lot of scaffolding in verbal, written, and reading comprehension strategies to give students support, but also promote learning individual strategies. A chef will offer encouragement to their sous chefs in order to encourage them to take risks and try new things. To me, this all goes back to building strong relationship with the students and the family. If a student doesn't believe in you and that you have their best interests at heart, they will not work for you. This brings us to the final two ingredients or toppings, both produced from the same two ingredients, sugar and cream, representing our relationships and forms, but the end product is vastly different. The relationships are important because students need to feel safe making mistakes. The forms are important to give students an example or a template to work with. The fresh whipped cream takes sugar and heavy whipping cream. You put both in the bowl and then you apply air, and the air brings about a light, fluffy creaminess and produces the whipped cream. The opposite is true for the caramel sauce. Although sugar and cream are still our two main ingredients, this time we put the cream and the sugar melted in a pan over the stove and apply heat, and this is what produces our caramel sauce. My analogy is that you have the same ingredients, but when you change how you handle them, you get different results. The example would be that students have different learning styles, and so the approach a teacher takes has to match the student's individual learning style for a successful outcome. Maybe some students don't want whipped cream on their cheesecake. They want only caramel sauce. Maybe others want just the whipped cream, but no caramel sauce. The teachers have to adjust to find the best combination of ingredients and toppings for each student. I have heard or was already familiar with the common myths teachers hear, such as teachers must give up all traditional practices or teachers must turn over all the power to students when teaching a second language. I simply don't believe this is true. At times, when students need to learn new skills and concepts, these must be directly taught using explicit instruction depending on the student's background knowledge. Much like following a recipe, explicit instruction must be provided in the classroom in certain areas in building skills and concepts. Teachers obviously also cannot give up all their power in the classroom. However, teachers can allow students more choice in their curriculum. Good chefs modify the recipe based on the ingredients they have available and the desired flavor they are trying to achieve. The teacher can act as more of a facilitator by asking leading or open-ended questions for students to draw their own conclusions, just like modifying the recipe. Instruction should emphasize the social nature of learning while providing a calm space for thinking, engagement, and creation. Students can appreciate the template or recipe provided, but also enjoy some creative freedom to personalize the final product to fit the individual. Through the use of both explicit and implicit instructional strategies, the student is able to participate and create a social conversation, or the cheesecake is baked. There's a saying, it takes a village to raise a child. I believe that's true for second language acquisition. It takes a team for a student to fully acquire a second language, a community of teachers working together. The EL specialist, which would be represented by me, is providing that explicit and implicit instruction in the acquisition of the second language. The regular education teacher, as represented by my husband Tom, spends the most time with the student and therefore must be knowledgeable about the student's language level and how to modify their work to fit that level. The special education teacher, represented by my oldest child, Aaron, can provide those special modifications and accommodations for those students who require that additional support. And finally, my admin team would be my youngest son, Taryn, the behind-the-scenes support, the people that establish the school culture and climate or that positive learning environment. I would like to thank all my helpers, Tom and Aaron as teacher representatives, and Taryn, my behind-the-scenes administration. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. If so, you've made me a very happy teacher. Thank you and goodbye.